She dumped her junk in my garage. 8 full months. No ask, no pay, no thanks. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, dead elliptical. A rug smelling like bad decisions and cheap wine. Then the HOA fine hid $150. Official letterhead. Violation garage aesthetics. All her crap, I called. She picked up sweetly. Toward Derek, darling, the HOA has standards. A man in your position should know that. Chore. A man in my position. I grinned. So you're right, Constance. I'm fixing it tonight. Chore. She hung up smug. Huge mistake. Freezing night. I stood in the driveway, garage wide open, her trash staring back at me under the one bare bulb I hadn't replaced yet. I knew exactly what to do. By morning, let's just say Constance had a very bad day and I had my garage back. What would you do? Drop it in the comments and tell me your state, because this Karen would run your HOA like a tyrant. Florida, Texas, California. Spill your HOA horror stories below. Before I tell you what I did, you need to know who I am and, more importantly, who she is. My name is Derek Calloway, 54, retired pipe fitter, part-time handyman, full-time guy who just wants Saturday morning coffee without a certified letter from a neighbor ruining it. I live in a ranch house in Cedar Ridge Estates, a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. 87 homes, 1 community pool. 1 Facebook group where grown adults argue about leaf blowers at midnight. You know the type. My garage is everything. Pegboard walls, labeled tool outlines, floor clean enough to eat off, WD-40 and sawdust, and the occasional smell of fresh grease. The honest kind. The kind that means something got fixed today. I rebuild small engines on weekends. It took 11 years to get that garage exactly right. 11 years. I live alone since my youngest left for college. Just me, the tools, and a '98 Ford Ranger I keep alive out of pure stubbornness. Now Constance Whitfield, HOA board president, 61 years old, retired from a county zoning office, where she apparently discovered she enjoyed telling people what to do. Drives a spotless white Cadillac SUV, wears linen blazers in August, like she's perpetually about to issue a citation. She doesn't talk to neighbors so much as she processes them like paperwork. Her husband Ron tends roses in the front yard with the thousand-wee stare of a man who stopped arguing sometime during the Obama administration. I respect Ron. Ron has accepted things I haven't yet. The HOA board has 5 members. 3 vote however Constance points. 1 Gary Ostrowski, 67, retired electrician, forearms like bridge cable, has been quietly waiting for Constance to self-destruct for 3 solid years. Gary is important later. Very important. Here's what you need to understand about Constance. Before the garage, she had a system north side of Mapler. Bigger homes, decorative garage doors, cars that weren't purchased used, got courtesy calls when there was a violation, a friendly knock, a heads up over the fence. South side, ranch houses, work trucks. Guys like me got certified letters every single time. I learned this the hard way 6 months before the garage situation. My buddy and I spent 4 days rebuilding a transmission on his pickup, parked out front. Ran perfectly, just wasn't pretty. Constance didn't knock, didn't text, sent certified mail citing Municipal Code 184B, $75 administrative fee. I drove the truck around the block just to prove it worked to nobody, just myself, then paid the fine and moved on. That was my first mistake. You don't let people like Constance walk away thinking they won. 3 months later, she appeared at my door Sunday afternoon. Hold a grocery store cookie tray, still in the plastic clamshell, sticker half peeled, wearing that smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. She needed a small favor, bonus room remodel. Contractor needed space cleared. Just a few boxes, 2 weeks, maybe 3, temporary. I looked at the cookie tray, I looked at her smile, and I, being a fundamentally decent human being who apparently needed a harder lesson, said yes. I should have asked for it in writing. I should have asked what a few boxes meant. I should have offered her a cookie back and closed the door. Instead, the next morning, a moving van rumbled up my street, Diesel so loud it rattled my kitchen window at 700 a.m. and 17 boxes came off that truck. Then an elliptical nobody had used since 2019 by the look of it. Then a plastic-wrapped clothes rack. Then a rolled-up Persian rug that smelled like cat hair, cedar, and something older and sadder underneath. That rug took up the entire back corner of my garage and radiated judgment for 8 straight months. 2 weeks became 1 month. 1 month became 4. I sent 2 polite texts asking for an update. Both were read. Neither answered. By month 5, I couldn't fit the Ranger inside my own garage. Started paying $60 a month to store it at my buddy Hank's place down the road. $6 a month. Every month you're going to want to remember that number. The morning I got that violation notice, I didn't yell, didn't slam anything, didn't even text her back right away. I poured a second cup of coffee, pulled on my boots, and walked into the garage. Stood there in the cold November air with the notice in one hand and the mug in the other, just looking. 17 boxes stacked against the wall, dead elliptical in the corner. That rug rolled up and leaning like it owned the place. My breath made small clouds in the air. The concrete was cold even through the soles of my boots. And somewhere underneath the cedar and cat hair smell of that rug, I could just barely catch the WD-40 and sawdust that used to be all this space smelled like. I made a decision right there. No yelling, no drama, no mistakes. I went back inside, got my phone, and started photographing everything methodically. Every box, every label, every visible corner of the garage, the crack in the elliptical's handlebar, the clothes rack leaning against my tool chest like it was comfortable there. Both text messages I'd sent Constance. Timestamps showing blue read receipts sitting there like quiet evidence. The violation notice dated next to my mailbox. Then I found a spiral notebook, blue cover, Walgreens 89. Sat down at the kitchen table and wrote everything out by hand. Every date, every dollar, the truck fine, the cookie tray Sunday, the 17 boxes, the 5 months of $6 parking fees at Hank's yard. All of it in order in ink. That notebook became the most important thing I owned for the next 3 months. I didn't know that yet, but I was about to find out. I hand-delivered a written note to Constance's door that same afternoon. Polite 1-page. I explained that per the HOA's own violation notice, the garage needed to be cleared immediately. I requested reimbursement for the $150 fine and the parking costs. I gave her 14 days. What came back wasn't a response to me. It was an email to the entire HOA board thread with me CC'd, which I genuinely appreciated, informing the board that Derek Calloway had been hostile and uncooperative and was refusing to honor a verbal community agreement. She used the word disruptive twice. She mentioned neither the fine she'd issued me, nor the 8 months of free storage, nor the parking money I'd been quietly spending every single month. Through their glass door, I could see Ron in the backyard tending his roses in 40-degree weather with the focused serenity of a monk. I circled the next HOA meeting on my calendar. First one I'd attended in 11 years of living here. The community center on a Wednesday night smells like burnt coffee and low-grade institutional disappointment. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights humming that particular frequency that makes everyone slightly hostile. Maybe 15 homeowners scattered around the room. Constance at the front table in the linen blazer, running the agenda like a woman who has long since made peace with the sound of her own voice. She didn't look at me once. When public comments opened, I stood up and read from a prepared statement. No raised voice, no emotion. 8 months of occupancy, 17 boxes, 1 elliptical, 1 rug, 1 clothes rack, or 480 in displaced parking. $150 fine issued by the same board member whose property was the direct cause of the cited condition. I set a copy of the statement on the board table and sat back down. The coffee maker dripped in the corner. That was the only sound for a full 3 seconds. Gary Ostrowski at the far end of the table leaned forward slowly, and looked down the row at Constance with the calm, unhurried expression of a man watching a chess game he's been studying for years, finally reached the position he predicted. Constance thanked me for my concerns, noted the board would review the matter internally, and pivoted to the next agenda item without breaking stride. Not a ripple, pure glacial control. But in the parking lot afterward, gravel crunching under boots, cold air sharp in the throat, everyone else already at their cars, she materialized at my elbow, voice low, smile in place, the blazer somehow still crisp at 9:30 at night. "Derek, I'd hate for a property like yours to come up for a county reassessment. These things happen, sometimes randomly." I held her gaze for a moment, felt the cold air in my lungs, heard the last few cars pulling out around us. "Good to know," I said. Got in the Granger, drove home, and the whole way back I kept thinking about that moving van, the one that had showed up at 7 in the morning 8 months ago and shaken a magnet off my fridge. I hadn't thought much about it at the time. Big commercial van, logo on the side, professional looking. When I got home, I ran the plates. The van was registered to a business entity, active status with the Ohio Secretary of State. Owner of record, Constance A. Whitfield. The business name was Whitfield Interiors LLC. I sat at the kitchen table and let that land for a minute. Not a personal remodel, not a bonus room cleanout, a business, a registered tax filing interior design and staging company. She hadn't been clearing out her own home. She'd been using my garage as a commercial storage warehouse for client inventory. 8 months free of charge without telling me, while I paid $60 a month to park my own truck somewhere else, and then find me for the clutter it created. I wrote it in the blue notebook in capital letters, underlined it twice, put a circle around the whole thing. I'd read somewhere years back that in Ohio, there's something called a possessory lien, a legal right that lets you make a claim against property someone has left in your custody when they owe you money. At the time, I'd filed it away as an interesting piece of trivia. The kind of thing that sounds useful in theory, but you never think you'll actually need. I was thinking about it now. I called Pete Drummond, paralegal high school friend, the kind of guy who picks up at 9:15 at night when you say it's actually important. "Pete, what happens when someone uses your private residential property for commercial storage without permission or compensation?" 4 seconds of silence. "Derek," he said slowly, "that is a genuinely interesting question." Pete called me back the next morning, 7:45. I was on my second coffee, blue notebook open on the kitchen table. Granger still parked at Hank's place because I still couldn't fit it in my own garage. He didn't waste time. So, "Here's the thing about Ohio," he said. "When someone leaves personal property in your custody and they owe you money, costs you've incurred directly because of that property, you have what's called a possessory lien, Ohio Revised Code, Section 1, 333.41. The law recognizes that you've been involuntarily turned into a storage facility, and it gives you a legal claim against the stored property itself as compensation." I wrote that down. Section 1, 333.41. Drew a box around it. "What do I actually have to do?" I asked. "Send formal written notice. Give her a cure period. 14 days is standard. If she doesn't pay or remove within that window, you can legally dispose of the property to recover your documented costs." And Derek, your documentation is unusually good. Most people don't have this kind of paper trail. That last part I owe entirely to 30 years of trades work. In pipe fitting, you learn fast that the job site argument you lose is almost always the one where the other guy wrote things down and you didn't. I'd been keeping notes by instinct. Turned out instinct was right. Pete drafted the demand letter that week. Firm letterhead, professional, precise, and I say this with full appreciation. The kind of document that reads completely differently than a handwritten note from a neighbor. It laid out everything. 8 months of unauthorized commercial storage, $480 in displaced vehicle costs, $150 in wrongfully issued fines, and formal notice of intent to exercise possessory lien rights if reimbursement and removal did not occur within 14 calendar days. Certified mail, green return receipt card, straight into the blue notebook. Then I waited. What I did not anticipate, though I should have honestly, was that Constance wouldn't respond to me at all. No call, no knock, no Ron appearing at the curb with a check and a pained expression. Instead, 3 days after delivery, my phone buzzed with a text from Gary. Emergency board meeting tonight. Not properly noticed. I'm going. I went too. Constance had called the session herself. No 48-hour advance notice to homeowners as required by the HOA's own governing documents. No posted agenda. Just a phone chain to her 3 reliable votes. She was attempting to push through an emergency resolution authorizing herself as board president to negotiate and settle community property disputes on behalf of homeowners. In plain English, she was trying to write herself official HOA cover to make my legal claim disappear. Gary objected the moment she read the motion, cited the bylaws by chapter and verse, advanced notice requirements, quorum rules, the specific provision against emergency sessions without documented cause. His voice was the voice of a man who had read those 62 pages so many times the page numbers were committed to memory, and who had been waiting patiently for exactly this occasion to use them. Constance overruled him anyway, pushed the vote through with her 3 rubber stamps in tidy formation. Gary had been recording the entire meeting on his phone. He told me in the parking lot afterward, cold night air sharp with exhaust and dead leaves, the community sense exterior light buzzing faintly overhead, that he'd kept his phone charged to full battery before every single meeting for the past 2 years. Figured she'd eventually do something worth keeping. He said without a trace of satisfaction in his voice, just a man who'd done his homework. I filed that audio next to everything else. 2 days after the certified letter was confirmed, delivered, green card back, signature on file, Constance came to my door. No cookie tray this time, just the blazer, the smile, and Ron idling in the Cadillac at the curb with the expression of a man mentally tending his roses from a distance. She told me to drop the legal nonsense, said the items were personal property and fully protected, said she'd have her actual attorney involved if I kept pushing. She said actual with a very specific emphasis, the tone of someone who considers paralegals roughly equivalent to people who once read a law book on an airplane. I made a mental note to tell Pete. He'd appreciate it. I had my phone recording in my breast pocket. Ohio is a 1P party consent state. You can legally record any conversation you're personally participating in. No notification required. I'd confirmed that online the night before in about 45 seconds. 45 seconds that would turn out to be worth considerably more than their face value. I completely understand, I said. I'll be in touch. She left satisfied. Ron pulled the Cadillac away from the curb with the quiet relief of a man whose part in this was finally over for the evening. I closed the door, pulled out my phone, listened to the whole conversation back, every word. Crystal clear. But the recording wasn't even the most important thing I found that week, because while I was working through the HOA's full governing documents, all 62 pages, the CCNRs that Gary had quietly forwarded after the illegal meeting, I found something in Section 9, Paragraph 4, buried in language so dry it nearly put me to sleep before I understood what I was actually reading. No board member or officer shall initiate, escalate, or adjudicate any dispute in which they hold a direct personal or financial interest. Constance had signed my violation notice herself in her official capacity as board president in a dispute where her own property was the direct cause of the condition being cited. Her own governing documents prohibited exactly that. The fine wasn't just unfair, it was void, invalid from the moment her pen left the paper. I wrote Section 9, Paragraph 4, in the blue notebook, underlined it 3 times. Then I sat back in my chair and looked at everything spread across the kitchen table. The certified mail receipt, the audio recording, the LLC registration, the CCNR clause, the 5 months of parking receipts from Hank's yard. And I felt for the first time since that moving van rattled my kitchen window something close to calm. I had more ammunition than I needed. The only thing left to decide was exactly when and exactly how to use it. Constance, meanwhile, was about to make one more mistake, the kind that would make all my preparation feel almost too easy. The 14-day deadline came and went like a Tuesday. No payment, no removal, no phone call, just a single text received on day 13 at 11:20 at night. I remember the time because I was already in bed, phone face down on the nightstand that read, "I'll be in touch soon." 8 words. After 8 months, after 630 undocumented costs, after a formal legal notice on firm letterhead sent via certified mail with return receipt. 8 words, 11:20 at night. Read receipt on. I wrote the date and time in the blue notebook. Underneath it, I wrote, "She thinks this is still her game." Pete confirmed what I already knew. The cure period had elapsed without compliance. My possessory lien rights under Ohio Revised Code Section 1-3R33.41 were fully activated. I could legally move to dispose of the stored property to recover my documented costs. Everything was in place, but I didn't move yet. 30 years in trades teaches you something that no classroom ever quite captures. The man who acts the instant he has enough leverage almost never gets as much as the man who waits for the other side to make one final unnecessary mistake. Constance had been making mistakes steadily for 8 months. I saw no reason to interrupt her. She didn't disappoint. At the next HOA meeting, properly noticed this time after Gary submitted a written bylaw compliance request that Constance couldn't refuse without creating yet another documented violation. She introduced what she called a Community Property Standards Initiative. The proposal required homeowners to submit their properties for board inspection before hosting any outdoor gathering or event. Barbecues, birthday parties, graduation cookouts, all subject to prior board review and approval. Prior approval from Constance. I sat in the back row and listened to her frame it with the smooth, practiced vocabulary of a woman who has spent a career dressing up control as community service. Simply maintaining the standards we all value. A small administrative step protects everyone's investment. She said it with the particular confidence of someone who has never once been asked to justify herself and doesn't expect tonight to be different. The 3 rubber stamps nodded on cue. You could set a calendar by them. When public comments opened, I stood up and asked one question calmly. Almost pleasantly, I asked whether the board president was required to recuse herself from all matters related to our ongoing property dispute per Section 9, Paragraph 4 of the CCNRs, and whether that recusal extended to any proposed rules that might affect the parties involved. Then I read the clause aloud, word for word slowly. The nodding stopped. Paul, the insurance guy at the end of the board table, 2 years of meetings, and not one original thought on record, looked down at his agenda copy with the expression of a man who has just noticed the floor might not be entirely load-bearing. Constance's smile stayed exactly in place, but her eyes did something I hadn't seen before. Just for a half second, a recalculation. The look of someone adjusting a plan they assumed was already finished. She thanked me for my procedural input and pushed the vote through anyway. 4-1. Gary's was the one. The initiative passed. But something had shifted in that room. The way air pressure shifts before a storm that hasn't announced itself yet. I felt it in the way Paul folded his agenda in half and didn't unfold it again. Outside, the November air bit at the back of my neck as I walked to the Ranger. Cold enough to see breath, Cold enough that the gravel in the parking lot sounded different underfoot. Harder, drier, the crunch of a season turning. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. County Assessor's Office. Routine reinspection of my property. No specific reason given. I stood at the kitchen window, holding the phone after I hung up, looking out at my garage through the glass. My neighbor Burl Hutchkins, 71, 31 years as a rural mail carrier, a man who has observed this neighborhood from street level every single day for 3 decades and retains everything, had mentioned over the fence the previous Thursday that he'd spotted Constance's white Cadillac in the county municipal building parking lot mid-morning. He'd clocked the time because Constance didn't usually leave the neighborhood before 11 on weekdays. Burl notices these things. The route never really leaves a carrier. It becomes a kind of permanent operating system. I called the assessor's office back, asked whether the review had been initiated by a third-party complaint. The woman I spoke to wouldn't confirm a name, but she paused just a half second, just long enough before she said, "Routine flagging." And that pause told me everything her words didn't. Constance had followed through on her parking lot threat. She'd used the county government office as a personal pressure tool against a neighbor with a legal claim against her. I wrote it all down. Date, time, the assessor's name, the pause. Then underneath, she just handed me documentation of the threat she made. Because here's what Constance never grasped about paper trails. And I mean this genuinely, not as a taunt, but as a simple fact of how documentation works. They run in both directions. Every move she made to pressure me became a record. Every overreach was a brick, and she'd been handing me bricks for months. One certified letter and one late-night text, and one county parking lot visit at a time. Until I had enough to build something, she was going to have serious trouble getting out from under. By mid-November, the full picture looked like this. Possessory lien rights activated and documented. Illegal board meeting on audio recording. CC&R conflict of interest violation in writing. Direct threat recorded on a one-party consent state. County assessor intimidation documented with a timeline. A wrongful fine void under the HOA's own rules. And 8 months of free commercial storage for a registered business, Whitfield Interiors LLC, running out of my residential garage without a single dollar of compensation. That was one side of the ledger. On the other side, Constance had a text message that said, "I'll be in touch soon," and a plan she thought was still secret. Burl had overheard her telling a neighbor, voices carrying across the cold front yard, the way they always do in November, that she needed her staged inventory back before Thanksgiving for a client delivery. She'd been photographed by Burl's casually observant eyes, measuring cargo dimensions on a rental van website on her phone. She was planning to show up, load everything, and drive away. No payment, no acknowledgement, no consequences whatsoever. She had no idea what I was planning to do, and I'll be honest with you, that was the detail I enjoyed most. Not the legal position, not the documentation. The fact that she was out there, measuring cargo space, while I was sitting in my kitchen with a plan she couldn't see coming. Couldn't counter, and couldn't undo once it started. I opened my laptop, pulled up Facebook Marketplace, and I started thinking about how to write a listing. Before I wrote a single word of that listing, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. Pete had been digging into Whitfield Interiors LLC for 3 days by then. Not illegally. Everything he pulled was public record. The kind of information sitting in plain sight on the Ohio Secretary of State's Business Registry, available to anyone willing to spend 20 minutes looking. Most people don't look. Pete looks at everything. He called me on a Tuesday evening while I was in the garage cleaning the workbench for the first time in months, just moving things around, really reorganizing the half of the space that was still mine. The half that still smelled like sawdust and honest work instead of someone else's cedar and regret. So Whitfield Interiors LLC filed taxes last year. Pete said active business interior design and property staging consultancy. She's been operating it out of the house for at least 3 years. I set down the shop rag I was holding and the stuff in my garage. That's where it gets interesting. I could hear him turning pages. You photographed the box labels right back in the beginning. I had day one every label timestamped. 2 of those boxes, Pete said, are labeled Staging Master Suite Lot 14 and Staging Living Farnsworth account. Those aren't her personal belongings, Derek. That's client inventory. That rug, the elliptical, the framed prints, the throw pillows, that's staging furniture she uses to dress up properties for sale. It's business equipment, commercial inventory. I stood in the middle of my garage in the cold and let that settle. She hadn't been clearing out a bonus room remodel. There was no bonus room remodel. She'd been clearing out staging inventory for a client, commercial goods belonging to a registered business, and she'd used my residential garage as a free warehouse to store them without disclosure, without compensation, without so much as asking whether I mind it being an unpaid commercial storage facility for 8 months. While finning me for the aesthetic impact of the clutter she put there, I sat down on my wooden stool under the bare bulb and just breathed for a moment. The cold concrete under my boots, the smell of the shop starting to come back to itself. WD-40 creeping back over the cedar now that I was thinking about it, reclaiming the air. Pete kept talking. He explained what the commercial use distinction actually meant in practical terms. Using someone's residential property for commercial purposes, storing business inventory, running client operations without disclosure or compensation opens up several distinct legal avenues. Simultaneously, there's a zoning angle. Commercial activity in a residential zone without permits is a municipal violation. There's a liability angle. If any of her business inventory had been damaged while in my garage, she'd have had no legal standing to claim it, because the arrangement was undisclosed and uncompensated. And then there's what Pete called the cleanest angle of all, unjust enrichment. Unjust enrichment is exactly what it sounds like. Ohio civil law recognizes that when one person receives a substantial benefit at another person's direct expense, without compensation or legal justification, the court can order them to pay for what they took. 8 months of commercial storage at even a modest market rate, $100 a month, conservative for a climate-controlled space, plus the displaced vehicle costs, plus the wrongful fine, put Derek's recoverable damages in small claims court somewhere between $1,200 and $500. Ohio small claims handles disputes up to $6,000, no attorney required. Filing fee under $100. Show up with your documentation and tell the truth. I'd read once that small claims court was designed specifically so that ordinary people with legitimate grievances wouldn't need to hire expensive lawyers to recover what they were owed. Sitting on that stool in my half-reclaimed garage, I finally understood what that meant from the inside. Pete finished his summary. I thanked him. We hung up. I sat there for another minute in the quiet. The bare bulb overhead, the pegboard on the wall with every tool in its labeled outline. The half of the garage that was still mine, still organized, still exactly right. Then I thought about Constance measuring cargo space on her phone, planning to walk in here and take everything back without a word, without a dollar, without a single acknowledgement of what 8 months had actually cost me. I picked up my phone, opened Facebook Marketplace. This time I started typing. The listing took me 45 minutes to write. Not because I didn't know what to say. I knew exactly what to say, but because I wanted every word to be right. I'd spent the previous evening confirming with Pete that what I was about to do was legally defensible from every angle. He walked me through it one more time slowly, The way you explain a load calculation to an apprentice who needs to understand it before he touches the pipe. The 14-day cure period had elapsed. Written notice had been properly served and confirmed delivered. My documented costs, $480 in parking, $150 in wrongful fines, and a conservative $800 in fair market commercial storage value at going rates for a climate-controlled residential space totaled well over the assessed value of the staged furniture and boxes sitting in my garage. Under Ohio's possessory lien provisions, disposal through reasonable means was legally permissible. I wasn't stealing. I wasn't retaliating. I was collecting a debt the law said I was owed, using the only asset available to collect it. Just make sure you document the condition of everything before the first person touches it. Pete said video walk-through time-stamped every item visible. I already had the camera ready. I called Gary that afternoon and told him what I was planning and why it was legal. Gary listened without interrupting. The particular silence of a man cross, referencing what he's hearing against what he already knows, and then said, "I'll be available by phone all evening." That was Gary's version of enthusiastic support. I texted Burl, "Tonight, I'm clearing the garage. Keep an eye out for any vehicles coming from Constance's direction." Burl texted back 4 minutes later, "Already in my chair, got my coffee." 71 years old, retired mail carrier, surveillance position by 700 p.m. with a hot beverage. I cannot overstate how much Burl Hutchkins contributed to this entire operation simply by being exactly who he is. I also filed the small claims complaint that afternoon online through Ohio's e-illing system, which accepts submissions around the clock because justice, at least administratively, doesn't keep business hours. The claim was straightforward. $630 the wrongful fine, plus 5 months of documented parking costs. I kept it clean and specific, well under the threshold that would extend the hearing timeline, filing confirmation printed into the blue notebook. At 8:45 that evening I did the video walkthrough, 90 seconds narrated, every item visible and in its existing condition, timestamps running. I photographed the garage one final time full width, corner to corner, and uploaded everything to a cloud folder Pete had access to. At 9:17 p.m., I posted the listing, "Free porch pickup tonight. First come, first served. Miscellaneous household items, boxes, framed art, decorative pillows, area rug, exercise equipment, clothing rack, no holds. Address via message, gone by morning." 11 minutes later, I had 23 messages. What happened next was one of the more quietly joyful things I have witnessed as an adult. A college student named Marcus showed up at 9:45 in a pickup truck, practically vibrating with the energy of someone who has just found a Persian rug for free on a Wednesday night. He and his roommate rolled it into the truck bed in under 4 minutes, shook my hand, and drove away. The rug that had occupied my back corner and radiated judgment for 8 months was gone before 10:00. The elliptical went to a woman named Tina, who'd been trying to get back into a routine since her knee surgery. She brought her nephew to carry it. He was about 19 and did not speak once, but worked with impressive efficiency. They were gone in 8 minutes. The boxes, still labeled with Constance's client staging inventory, master suite, lot 14, Farnsworth account, went to 2 separate families who had found what they believed to be an extraordinary free yard sale: decorative throw pillows, framed art prints, sample tile swatches, and little labeled envelopes. One woman held up a framed watercolor of a lighthouse and said, "This is actually really nice." It was. Constance had good taste in staging inventory. I'll give her that much. The clothes rack went to a young couple who needed it for their laundry room. They left a thank you note tucked in my screen door, which I found at midnight and which struck me as the most civilized thing that had happened in connection with this garage in 8 months. By 11:35, the garage was empty. I stood in the middle of it under the bare bulb, boots on cold concrete, The November night pressing against the walls and breathed, just breathed. The cedar and cat hair and cheap wine smell of that rug was gone. The WD-40 and sawdust were back, faint but present. The honest baseline smell of a space that belonged to me again. 11 years of building exactly the right garage. 8 months of having it taken. And now at 11:35 on a Wednesday night in November, it was mine again. I turned off the light, went inside, made a cup of tea I didn't really want, and drank it, standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the dark garage. Somewhere across the neighborhood, Constance was asleep, confident in her plan, measuring cargo space in her dreams. By morning, there would be nothing left to measure. Burl texted me at 70:22 the next morning. 3 words. She just arrived. I was already up, coffee in hand, sitting at the kitchen table with the blue notebook open and my phone face up. I'd slept well, better than I had in months, honestly. And I'd been waiting for this with the particular calm of a man who has already won and is simply watching the conclusion arrive on schedule. Burl's texts came in over the next 11 minutes, like dispatches from a man who had been born for exactly this assignment. The white Cadillac parked out front at 7023. Constance walked to my side gate, opened it, went to the garage. Burl reported the garage door going up, then nothing for 3 full minutes. Just Burl watching, coffee going cold. A woman standing in an empty garage, trying to process something her brain wasn't ready to accept. She went back to the Cadillac, got on her phone. Burl said she was typing hard, not talking. Typing the kind of fast and pressured typing that never produces anything good. Then she went back to the garage, picked up one of my tools from the pegboard. Burl couldn't tell which one from his angle, and put it back. Just stood there again, looking at clean concrete and empty air where 8 months of her business inventory used to be. At 70:33, she left. Didn't knock on my door, didn't ring the bell. Just walked back to the Cadillac, got in, and drove away. Burl's final text read, "She didn't look good. Derek." I sat at the kitchen table and finished my coffee. I sat at the kitchen table and read those messages twice. Then I poured myself a second coffee and waited for what I knew was coming next. It came at 7:44. 11 text messages in 9 minutes, arriving in a cluster like a weather system moving fast. They began clipped and formal. "Derek, what has happened to the items stored in your garage and deteriorated with impressive speed?" By message 4, she was asking what I had done with her property. By message 7, the capitalization had started. By message 9, she used the phrase, "I will have you arrested for the first time." It appeared 2 more times before the thread ended. I screenshotted every message without responding, forwarded them to Pete. Pete replied in 6 minutes. "Beautiful. Don't answer. Let her keep going." At approximately 9:00 a.m., a Columbus Police Department patrol officer knocked on my door. Non-emergency response, pleasant enough. He had the look of a man who had been dispatched to resolve what he had already assessed before arriving as a civil matter. I invited him in, offered coffee. He declined, but appreciated the gesture. I put the blue notebook on the kitchen table and walked him through it from the beginning. The certified demand letter with the green return receipt card, the photographs of every item timestamped from day 1, the lien notice, the violation notice Constance had issued me, the 11 texts she'd sent this morning, screenshots printed and in the notebook already, because I'd done that at 8:00 a.m., the audio recording of the parking lot threat, the LLC business registration, the CC&R clause. The officer reviewed everything with the methodical attention of someone who has learned to distinguish documentation from complaint. He made a call, conferred briefly, came back and said, "This appears to be a civil matter, sir. You'll want to speak with an attorney." He handed me a card. I thanked him. He left. Through the kitchen window, I could see Constance's white Cadillac still parked across the street. It sat there for another 4 minutes after the officer left. Then it pulled away slowly, and I watched it go, and I felt nothing in particular except the quiet satisfaction of a man whose paperwork is in order. By noon, Constance had posted in the Cedar Ridge Estates Facebook group. She was careful. She didn't name me directly. She posted that a neighbor had taken advantage of a vulnerable situation, and that valuable property had been removed without consent. She used the word predatory twice. She posted a photo taken from outside through my open garage door of the empty space. She asked whether other community members had experienced similar behavior from people posing as helpful neighbors. I read it on my phone in the garage, sitting on my wooden stool, surrounded by clean, empty space that smelled entirely like mine again. Within 30 minutes, the post had 14 comments. 4 were sympathetic to Constance, the rubber stamps and their spouses working in shifts. 7 were confused, asking for clarification she couldn't provide without incriminating herself. And 3, including one from Gary Ostracki, who had clearly been watching the thread with the patience of a man who has been patient about everything for 3 years, were asking pointed, specific questions she had no safe answers to. Gary's comment was 6 sentences long. It said, "Before we form community opinions on this, I want to make sure everyone has the full context of what's been happening. There's quite a bit of documented history here that hasn't been shared. I'm happy to provide it to anyone who's interested. I won't post it publicly without permission, but I will say this much. There are 2 sides to this story, and the side that hasn't been told yet is the more complete one. He did not raise his voice. He did not make accusations. He simply opened a door and waited to see who would walk through it. Within 22 minutes, 9 people had clicked the interested reaction. Constance deleted the post. Gary had the screenshot before it disappeared. So did I. So did it. Turned out about 6 other neighbors who had been watching with interest and quick fingers. I laughed for the first time in months. Sitting in my empty garage under the bare bulb, boots on cold concrete, the honest smell of WD-40 in the air. The sound bounced off the clean walls and came back to me, and I laughed again because sometimes things work out in ways that are tidier than you had any right to expect. 6 days later, a letter arrived from an attorney, Harold Frink, Think & Associates, Real Estate and Closing Law, address on the north side of Columbus. The letter was on heavy cream stationery and used the word "herein" 4 times in the first paragraph, which is how you know someone is trying to sound more dangerous than they are. It claimed that Derek Calloway had unlawfully converted property belonging to Constance Whitfield. It demanded replacement of all removed items valued by Constance at $4,200. It threatened civil suit. It used the phrase "without further delay" twice and "legal remedies" 3 times. I read it at the kitchen table with my coffee. Then I scanned it and emailed it to Pete. Pete called back in 9 minutes. I could hear him almost smiling through the phone. Harold Frink is a real estate closing attorney. He said he does purchase contracts and title work. He has not filed a civil litigation case in this county in 4 years. This letter is theater, Derek. Good stationery, but theater. So what do I do? Nothing yet. Write down today's date. Let her spend the money on Harold. I wrote down the date. Then I wrote underneath it, she's paying a closing attorney to write scary letters. She's scared. That realization that Constance was scared was more useful than anything else that had happened in the past week. Scared people make mistakes. Scared people overreach. And overreach, as I had learned thoroughly by this point, generates documentation. I spent the next 10 days building the binder. Physical, 3, ring, tabbed, the kind of thing you bring to a meeting when you want the other side to understand, the moment you set it on the table, that you have been more organized about this than they have been about anything. Tab 1. All photographs timestamped from day 1 through the night of the listing. Tab 2. The certified demand letter and the green return receipt card. Tab 3. Both text message chains, the unanswered polite ones and the 11 message explosion. Tab 4. The blue notebook, photocopied page by page. Tab 5. The audio recording transcript typed out by Pete with timestamps. Tab 6. Gary's recording of the illegal emergency board meeting transcript included. Tab 7. CCNR Section 9, Paragraph 4, highlighted. Tab 8. The Whitfield Interiors LLC business registration pulled from public record. Tab 9. The county assessor notice with my handwritten timeline notes connecting it to Constance's parking lot threat. Tab 10. The Facebook post screenshots. Constance's original Gary's comment. The deletion timestamp 47 pages. It smelled like fresh printer ink and finished business. The Cedar Estates' annual homeowners meeting was announced for the first week of December, the meeting where board elections were held. Gary confirmed what I'd found in the bylaws. Any homeowner with a documented governance complaint could present it to the full membership during the election portion. On the record, before a vote, I confirmed my attendance. 4 days before the meeting, Constance came to my door one final time. Ron was with her, standing slightly behind and to her left, hands in his jacket pockets, in the posture of a man fulfilling an obligation he did not design and cannot escape. The roses were long finished for the season. He had nothing to tend. He looked like he missed them. Constance offered me $300 cash in an envelope. She said she acknowledged there had been some miscommunication on both sides. She said she wanted to move forward as neighbors. She smiled the smile. A $300 after 6.30 in documented direct costs, after 8 months of commercial storage at market rate, after the assessor threat and the 11 texts and the 4,000 demand letter from Harold Frink of the Heavy Cream Stationery. A $300, I'll think about it, I said. I closed the door, stood in the hallway for a moment in the quiet. Then I wrote in the blue notebook. Offered $300, filed claim for 6.30. She knows she's losing. That evening, I made one more call to Shelby Ames, a reporter at the Westerville Courier, who had covered HOA governance disputes before and had by reputation a healthy intolerance for sources being pressured into silence. I gave her a 20-minute briefing, emailed her the key documents from the binder. She asked if she could attend the annual meeting. I told her it was a public meeting. She said she'd be there. I hung up, finished my coffee, and went to bed at 10:30. I slept the way a man sleeps when everything that needs to be ready is ready, and all that's left is morning. The Maple Crest Estates' annual homeowners meeting drew 41 people. That might not sound like a lot, but in a community of 87 homes, where the average monthly meeting pools may be 15 neighbors in a pot of burnt coffee, 41 people on a cold December Tuesday night, means word had gotten around. People were standing along the back wall. Someone had brought their own folding chair. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar hostile frequency. The coffee was burnt because, of course, it was. Some things are constants. Shelby Ames sat in the second row with a small notebook and a digital recorder on the seat beside her. She was 34 and had the particular stillness of a reporter who has learned that the best thing you can do at a contentious public meeting is stay very quiet and let people talk. Constance saw her immediately. Who invited the press? She said loudly enough for the front 3 rows to hear. Several people shrugged. Gary said mildly, "It's a public meeting, Constance." Constance straightened her blazer. December still linen. I will never stop being impressed by this, and called the meeting to order. She ran the early agenda with her usual competence. Treasurer's report, committee updates, maintenance schedule for the pool enclosure. She moved through it with the smooth authority of a woman who has run these meetings for years and intends to run them for many more. She did not look at me. She did not look at Gary. She looked at her agenda and her 3 rubber-stamp board members. And she ran that room like a general who hasn't yet been informed that the supply lines are cut. When the meeting reached board elections and the floor opened for governance comments, I stood up. I was wearing a clean flannel shirt. I had the binder. I thanked the community for their time and said I had a governance complaint to present before voting proceeded. My voice was steady. I've stood in louder rooms than this with more at stake, reading measurements off instruments in conditions that didn't allow for error. This was just a folding chair room with 41 neighbors and a woman in a linen blazer who had made a series of increasingly poor decisions. I began with the timeline. The cookie tray sundae, the 17 boxes, the 8 months, the $60 a month, the violation notice, the certified demand letter, the lien rights, item by item, date by date, dollar by dollar, in the voice of a man reading a work order, not performing outrage, just accounting for facts. The room was completely quiet. Even the coffee maker had stopped dripping. When I reached the illegal emergency board meeting, Gary produced his phone and played 30 seconds of audio. Constance's voice, clear and unmistakable, overriding Gary's bylaw objection on an improperly noticed meeting. 3 people in the audience exchanged looks. One woman put her hand over her mouth, not in shock, in recognition. The look of someone hearing confirmed what they had long suspected. When I showed the Whitfield Interiors LLC registration and the box label photographed side by side, staging inventory for a commercial client stored in a residential neighbor's garage for 8 months for free, the room shifted. Not dramatically, just a degree or two. The kind of shift you feel in the air pressure of a space when the group understanding of something changes all at once. When I laid out the county assessor intimidation timeline, Constance's Cadillac in the municipal building parking lot, the call 2 weeks later, the too long pause before routine flagging. Constance said for the first time all evening, "That is not accurate." Her voice was tight, not calm. The glacial control had a crack in it, thin as a hairline fracture, but visible. From the back of the room, clearly and without drama, someone said, "Let him finish." I finished. I placed a copy of the 3-page binder summary in front of each board member, one in front of Shelby Ames. Then I said the thing I had decided to say 3 weeks earlier when I was building the binder, at this same kitchen table, and thinking about what I actually wanted from all of this. I don't want anyone removed. I don't want drama. I want the fine reversed, the lien satisfied, and a governance review so this can't happen to anyone else sitting in these chairs. I sat down. 41 neighbors applauded. Not thunderously, not a standing ovation, just the genuine unperformed sound of people who recognized something true when they heard it and wanted to say so. Constance attempted a rebuttal. She used the words personal vendetta and procedural irregularities. She used community standards twice. And then Paul, the insurance man, the rubber stamp, the man who had not deviated from Constance's position in 2 full years of monthly meetings, looked down at the binder summary, looked back up at Constance and said, "I think we need to table the election and schedule a governance review." 7 words from Paul, in the fluorescent light and the burnt coffee smell of the Cedar Ridge Estates Community Center on a Tuesday in December. That was the sound of the foundation giving way. The election was tabled. The governance review was formally moved and seconded. Gary seconded it before the words were fully out of Paul's mouth. 3 weeks later, Derek Calloway received a default judgment in Franklin County Small Claims Court for $630+ filing costs. Constance did not appear. The judgment was entered, printed, and filed in the blue notebook behind everything else. It was the least satisfying, the $630 I have ever collected, and also in some ways the most. The governance review took 6 weeks. An independent reviewer appointed by the Ohio HOA oversight body went through everything: the binder, The recordings, the CCNR provisions, the meeting records going back 18 months. She was thorough and unhurried, and produced a report that was in the particular dry language of official findings, about as damning as official language gets. 3 formal findings. 1. The emergency board meeting had been improperly convened and its resolutions were void. 2. The violation notice issued to Derek Calloway had been signed by a board officer with a direct personal interest in the dispute in violation of Section 9, Paragraph 4, and was therefore invalid and reversed. 3. The board was required to implement a written conflict of interest recusal policy within 90 days, with compliance reported to the oversight body. The findings were public record. Shelby Ames published her story in the Westerville Courier the week they were released. Thorough, fair, completely sourced. 2 regional outlets picked it up within 4 days. The headline on the second pickup read, "Ho, a president fined neighbor for clutter created by her own business inventory." It was accurate. It was not kind. Constance did not comment. At the January board meeting, she announced she was stepping back from her board role to focus on her business. She said it in the same measured tone she used for everything. The linen blazer one final time. The smile in place. The voice projecting the particular dignity of a person declining to acknowledge what has happened. She did not apologize. She did not address the room. She read a prepared statement, folded it, and left before the meeting concluded. Ron, by all accounts, looked like a man who had been quietly waiting for this for a very long time. Whitfield Interiors LLC was dissolved the following spring. Gary Ostracki was elected interim board president by acclamation at the February meeting. His first act was to circulate the complete HOA governing documents to every homeowner in the development, something that hadn't been done in 7 years. His second act was to reduce the administrative fine for minor violations from $75 to $25 and to add a mandatory courtesy call step before any written notice could be issued. Small changes, real ones, the kind that don't make headlines, but make a neighborhood function like one. The Ranger moved back into the garage in February. First time in 9 months. I pulled it in on a Saturday morning, parked it exactly where it belonged, and stood there for a minute just looking at it. Clean concrete, WD-40 and sawdust, everything in its labeled place on the pegboard. 11 years of work still there. Exactly, right? Some things are worth protecting. That's the whole story, really. But there's one more part. That spring, Burl Hutchkins suggested something at one of the informal get-togethers that had started happening in my garage on Saturday mornings. Just a few neighbors. Coffee, whoever wanted to come. He suggested we make it official, a monthly skills exchange. Rotating garages around the development. Neighbors teaching neighbors practical things, basic electrical, plumbing, diagnostics, small engine maintenance, furniture repair, food preservation. The kind of knowledge that used to pass between neighbors as a matter of course, and had somehow, somewhere along the way, stopped. We called it the Mapliris Skills Exchange. The first session drew 9 people. The second drew 16. By April, we had a waiting list. The HO, under Gary's quiet governance, formally endorsed it and allocated $500 from the community fund for supplies and materials. It smelled like sawdust and chili and engine grease and good coffee. And it was the best thing to happen in Mapliris Estates in years, possibly ever. At Burl's suggestion, we established a small scholarship alongside it, the Mapliris Trade Scholarship, funded by neighbors who chipped in voluntarily, awarded to a graduating local high school senior pursuing vocational or technical certification. The first year's award was $500. It went to a 17-year-old named Caleb, who wanted to be an HVAC technician. The aftermath. In February, I finally parked my old Ford Ranger back inside the garage. Exactly where it belonged. Clean floor, tools on the pegboard. Everything the way it had been for 11 years. These days, neighbors gather in my garage on Saturday mornings, coffee, tool repairs, teaching each other practical skills. We even started a small trade scholarship for local students. First award went to a kid studying HVAC, $500. All because one woman thought she could treat my garage like free storage. The lesson: petty authority has one fatal weakness. It assumes you won't bother fighting back. But if you know the law, if you document everything, and if you stay patient, sometimes the best revenge isn't yelling. It's simply letting the truth do the work, and occasionally posting a marketplace listing at 9:17 on a Wednesday night.